I'm Jamie Racine, and welcome to this week's blog, vlog, whatever we call it. We're on part 2 of our 8-week session all about executive functioning. And this week we are going to be digging into the concept of flexible / adaptive thinking with ADHD. I want to talk about this because it's just such a super important of ADHD, and kids with ADHD tend to have very rigid ways of thinking. It's hard for them to do things outside of the prescribed methods because oftentimes it creates a great deal of anxiety. And having that flexible thinking and ability to shift on the fly is something that we all need in life because things change all the time. But kids with ADHD, that tends to be a struggle. You'll see it often in difficulty with transitions at school, driving a different way to a normal location, to the grocery store, to grandma's house, wherever, or with changing the rules of a game or something like that. And so we want to help kids build that skill so that they can kind of be able to have the ability to a little bit go with the flow a little bit more than they typically are able to. While kids with ADHD can tend to be super creative and outside of the box thinkers in and of itself, those tend to be with ideas that they come up with on their own. But when they're not prepared for something and you do something outside the box, something that they're not expecting, a whole barrage of behaviors can come into play. I'm sure that this is a familiar thing for you if you're parenting a child with ADHD, but maybe you never really realized that's what was causing the behaviors. For example, you have a friend whose child is having a birthday party and it's, let's just say, at a bowling alley or a mini golf course, and they're excited to go at first, and then when the event gets a little bit closer, they start to get really nervous. Maybe they start to act up, and then you start threatening to take the party away because of their behaviors. But really what's happening is they're anticipating this party, but they have no idea what to expect. And so instead of being able to communicate that with you because they don't have the skill to do that, they just act out the way that their body is feeling on the inside. So if we as parents can start to understand that these behaviors are just symptoms of their difficulty with this process of executive functioning, difficulty with flexible thinking, with part of their ADHD symptoms or / traits, then we'll be better equipped to manage it and have a preemptive strike before everything tanks before the event, right? So that, that unpredictability for them is managed. So my goal in this episode is to clear up some of the questions you may have when it comes to why your child acts up before you go do an activity or do something new or change the routine or otherwise do something out of the ordinary, unexpected for your child. Gosh, I can remember when my son was little, he was diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 3. It was funny because I had my master's degree in social work, which meant I'm a mental health clinician, for crying out loud. Like, I studied mental illness, all the mental illnesses, depression, anxiety, all that stuff. I studied ADHD, which is not a mental illness. It's just a different way that your brain functions. Autism, all those things. I studied all that stuff, right? So you'd think that, I would be extra equipped to be able to deal with a child with special needs. Well, that's really funny because I didn't know what I didn't know. And frankly, the stuff that I learned in school didn't always apply. I mean, I understood the concept of behavioral modification. I understood the basics of behavior and reward, but holy cow, I did not understand the intensity of which my skills would be needed, tested, needed, and tested some more. I couldn't surprise my kids. I couldn't surprise my son with anything. I couldn't do anything for him that was unpredictable. A spontaneous activity, forget it. He would, if he didn't know where we were going or what we were doing, he would basically be in panic mode the entire time, sobbing, having a meltdown because he was just so unsure of what was happening. I remember I couldn't give him chicken noodle soup with his grilled cheese one night because he always has tomato soup with his grilled cheese. Just couldn't wrap his brain around that concept. And I didn't prepare him. I just put it in front of him, right? It took so much work and effort to understand this. Oh gosh, but the biggest one, oh boy. The biggest one, and I should have known better. I should have known better. I'd been at this with him for several years at this point when it all went down, but I knew he couldn't handle sudden changes and surprises. I knew it. But we decided to do it anyway, and thinking that the reward or what we were doing would sort of usurp any sort of anxious reaction. But oh boy, was I wrong. I was so wrong. So here's what happened. My husband David and I had worked really hard to be able to take our family on a trip to Disney World. We saved and planned and prepared, and we were so excited. We wanted to do that whole thing where you surprise your kids after something, and for a long time they had those videos going around where families would show, surprising their kids with a trip to Disney World. Well, we decided to do it at the end of the school year as sort of like a fun end of the year family vacation. We had one kid getting ready to go off into middle school, and so they were all actually our oldest, and so they were all actually in the elementary school at the time. And it was the last day of school. We arranged last minute with the school to pick them up. The kids didn't know we were picking them up from school, so that was a surprise to them. So we got there, we were all planned, we had Disney t-shirts on, the whole nine. I walked up to the parent pickup area, and the kids were called down, and they were a little surprised when they came in. They were like, we didn't know we were being picked up. I was like, I know, I thought it would be fun to surprise you for like a little last day of school outing. Let's go get some ice cream, whatever. Well, what they didn't know was that our whole family was in the back of the parking lot wearing their Disney t-shirts, like with signs, like very excited. And then they walk up and they're like, what's going on? And we were like, surprise, we're going to Disney World now. Well, while the rest of the kids were like, what? Really? What? My son with ADHD was like, no! And he screamed and he cried and he had a major meltdown. I didn't think there was any way on God's green earth we were going to be able to get him on that airplane. He was terrified. I felt awful. I felt like I had seriously messed up and this was going to just be the worst vacation ever. I failed there. And my husband was still at the point where he was really struggling to understand ADHD, the symptoms of ADHD. So he was having a hard time understanding the reaction. And the entire ride down, like was full of anxiety and questions. I was able to get him on the airplane. I mean, he really didn't have a choice, but I sat with him, and he was terrified. He was crying. He was whimpering. He just didn't know. And so we were waiting to take off. I was holding his hand. I had my arms around him, doing everything I could to comfort him. And then we took off and we were in the air. And he finally started to calm down. It turned out that it was the flying part that was the scariest thing for him. But wow, what an ordeal it was just to even get in the air. And then he started laughing at himself, right? Because he knew that he was so worried and he was fine once we got in the air. We ended up having a wonderful vacation. He was able to kind of wrap his brain around the whole thing eventually, and we ended up having a wonderful vacation. And he was a little bit nervous about getting on the plane on the way home, but we had been talking about it during the vacation and preparing him a little bit more for it and reminding him that he already had done it and that the experience was okay. But man, I never should have dropped that bomb on him, even if it was fun for the other kids. Like, that should not have happened because his little brain could not understand what was happening. He needed tons of preparation. He needed to see videos of people on airplanes, of people flying, of airports, of things like that to prepare him so that he would not be so anxious. The stress and anxiety that whole ordeal caused him was just not worth it. And then it makes people think that your child's just being ungrateful or they're being sort of a spoiled brat or whatever. That was not the case at all. It was his anxiety taking over. I learned a hard lesson there. And most recently, when we took our last family vacation, he did wonderful, but we didn't drop the bomb. We did give that to them as a gift, but we had plenty of time to prepare for what was to come. We looked at videos of the hotel. We looked at videos of the different activities that they could do, the different food there was. And so when he got there, he pretty much knew what was going to be going on. Flying was no big deal. He was a little bit nervous, but because we could remind him that he had done it before and it was okay, it was good. And he had a great time with the flight attendant. So it ended up working out really well, but I had to learn that hard lesson too. I think the most important takeaway from this is that if you are in situations that you notice cause behavioral issues with your kiddo, if they don't tolerate change well, or if they have difficulty with transitions, they might be having difficulty with flexible thinking. So they need a lot of support there. They need plenty of preparation and warning. They need cues and rewards when they're successful at managing. Most of all, they need parents and caregivers who are patient and understanding that even though the behaviors are big, there are underlying causes that are based in their brain chemistry. Their ability to process what's happening around the world and feeling anxious is all because of how their brain chemistry works. They're not at all trying to be defiant. They're not trying to be ungrateful. They just don't know how to express their feelings in a way that is effective when all of a sudden there's a change in the way they can interact with their world. And that's where we have to come in as parents. We have to recognize that they're experiencing symptoms related to their ADHD and that they're just not able to process the sudden shifts. We have to be very intentional about how we react to those behaviors and how those behaviors make us feel. Because if we're reacting to those behaviors based on how they make us feel, we're probably going to create shame and guilt within our child for something they truly cannot help. Okay. When my son had such a big negative reaction to going to Disney World, I could have gotten very upset with him. I could have told him he was being ungrateful, to knock it off, grow up, get over it, whatever. I could have done all those things, but I didn't. I had had enough practice to that point to know that it had nothing to do with Disney World. He was the biggest Mickey Mouse fan ever. He loved Chip and Dale Funnies, all those quick, short, slapstick cartoons on Disney Channel. He loved all the Disney movies. It had nothing to do with him being anything negative and everything to do with the way his ADHD brain is made. Eventually, and unfortunately it took time, he was able to calm down, wrap his brain around the whole concept, and he had a wonderful time on vacation. Probably would have been much better had I looked past my need to see them excited and surprise them and look at what he needed in the moment to be successful in that situation. Because the reality is, if we had given them time to prepare, our kids still would have been surprised. It just wouldn't have been in the moment. So we learned our lesson and we didn't do that again. I hope this helps you to understand flexible and adaptable thinking a little bit more. It's one of the 7 functions of executive functioning, and kids with ADHD tend to have about a 40% delay in this development. So I hope this helps you to put into perspective some of your child's behaviors when they act out over change or transition or don't comply with the rules changing or have difficulty managing surprises. I hope this helps you to stop for just a second, think about your own reaction, and choose a response to your child that's going to support him through his underlying feelings, the underlying causes of what's causing these reactions and behaviors. and to help honor his experience and help to bring him back down to ground zero, right? So if you want more information on ways to help build this skill at home, please feel free to pre-register for my comprehensive course on executive functioning. This is actually being released on May 1st, and you can click on the link in the blog to pre-register. It's going to go into detail about all areas of executive functioning and give you specific steps and techniques that you can use to build and improve upon those skills. So you don't want to miss it. It's going to be a wonderful resource. And any parent can use this, but in particular, any parent with a child with ADHD. So until next time, I hope you found this helpful. I'll see you then.